Hello, this lecture is on Turfgrass Establishment. I'm your presenter, Alec Kowaleski, the turf specialist at Oregon State University. So let's take a look at Turfgrass Establishment. So in this lecture today, I'm going to talk about the optimum time for turfgrass establishment as well as steps to successful turfgrass establishment. And I'll be highlighting 8 steps to successful establishment. So first, let's talk about optimum time for turfgrass establishment. And we'll be focusing mostly on the state of Oregon here. Optimum time for turfgrass seeding. So the grasses that do well in the state of Oregon are cool season grasses. And these cool season grasses do exceptionally well in the fall and in the spring months. So if we can seed during these 2 times of the year, we're most likely to have a good turfgrass establishment. I think if I were to pick a time for the best establishment, it would be fall in my opinion. Because what you're going to have is in the fall months, temperatures are relatively cool. You've got precipitation starting to kick in. The grass can then grow through the fall into the winter, out of the winter and into the spring without having any heat stress. And when we're talking about cool season grasses, the grasses that thrive in Oregon, they do very well in cool and cold environments. The time of the year where they struggle the most is during the summer months. Okay, so if you seed in the fall, that'll give you 2 growing seasons before getting into the stressful part of the year, the summer. If we do a spring establishment, it's going to be a little more difficult to get a nice establishment through that summer of the first year, and a little more frequent irrigation will likely be required in the first summer if we're doing a spring establishment versus a fall establishment. Okay, so that's our 2 optimum times for turfgrass seeding in the state of Oregon, fall and spring. And when we first seed or sod a new stand of turfgrass, this is very important if we have more than 1 or 2 days without precipitation, because the grass seed particularly has not developed a root system. So if the surface of the soil dries out in the spring and the fall, the seed will die. So we need to do almost daily irrigation early on when we've just seeded a new stand of turf until we see plants growing. Once we've got plants up and growing at about the 3-leaf stage, meaning a plant has 3 leaves coming out of it, we can start to reduce down our irrigation frequency or turn it off as we're moving into the fall months or during periods of adequate precipitation. Okay, so we talked about the optimum time for turfgrass establishment, seeding or sodding being the fall followed by the spring. Now let's talk about steps to successful turfgrass establishment. And we'll work through our 8 steps of successful turfgrass establishment. So here we see our 8 steps to turfgrass establishment, successful turfgrass establishment. Listed from top to bottom being soil test, weed control, surface renovation, liming and basic fertilizer, seedbed preparation, starter fertilizer application, seeding or sodding, and then finally mulching. Okay, so these steps should be done in this sequence. Okay, it won't work if we apply the seed, step 7, and then come back and do our surface renovation after that. All of these steps should be done in the sequence that's shown here, 1 through 8. Okay. And we should also point out that not all these steps are required. The 3 required steps, in my opinion, are surface renovation, starter fertilizer application, and seeding. So you can skip steps. We could skip soil testing and weed control and jump right in with surface renovation. We could then skip liming and seed bed preparation and then go out and apply our starter fertilizer and then our seeding or sodding, and we could skip the step of mulching as well. Okay, but the two take-home points here is that this is the order in which the steps should be done, and then these are the 3 required steps: surface renovation, starter fertilizer application, and seeding or sodding. Okay, so let's work our way through these 8 steps starting at the top, and I'll provide reminders throughout whether these are required or suggested renovation steps. Okay, so let's take a look at soil test first. And remember, this is an optional step in our 8-step process here. So soil testing. Okay, we want to take a composite soil sample of the area that we're going to do a renovation on. And that means we're going to go out with a hand trowel or a shovel or a soil probe like you see in the top right photo. We're just going to take 10 samples per acre. So if you were sampling a baseball field or a soccer field or a football field, that'd be about 10 samples per football field. You're going to go down to a 4 to 6 inch depth, which is the approximate rooting depth of turf grass. You're going to take those 10 samples, remove the turf and the thatch off the top of it, put the soil in a plastic bucket, and mix it all together. Okay, we're then going to send that soil sample in for analysis, and a great location is the OSU Central Analytical Lab on campus. And we're going to request a basic soil test. So some of the important things you'll find in a basic soil test include the acidity of the soil, whether it's alkaline or acidic, and we're typically concerned with acidic soil pHs. They will also be providing a lime recommendation in association with the acid analysis. So if the pH is low, they'll suggest a liming rate for us. And also in the basic soil test, we'll have macronutrient deficiency information. So specifically, we're talking about phosphorus and potassium, as well as calcium, magnesium, and sulfur deficiencies. We don't get nitrogen on our basic soil test because nitrogen is needed at a very high concentration compared to the other nutrients. So the general assumption is that we're going to be making regular nitrogen fertilizer applications regardless of the soil levels because we know the plant needs a lot of it. Okay, but you will get information on these primary and secondary nutrients listed here in your basic soil test. Okay, so that was our soil test. Next, we're going to do weed control. And again, this is an optional step. Okay, so weed control methods. If we're doing a complete new establishment, meaning we're going to take everything down to bare soil and completely start over, we can use non-selective herbicides. And the example I have listed here is glyphosate. So we're going to use a non-selective herbicide to kill everything that's out there. Okay. Secondly, if we're renovating an existing stand of turf grass, we should use a selective broadleaf herbicide, meaning we want to kill the broadleaf plants in the lawn, but leave the existing turf. Okay, so some examples here of selective broadleaf herbicides include 2,4-D, which is very good on dandelion, triclopyr, which is very good on clover, MCPP, which is also very good on dandelion and plantain, and dicamba, which is also very good on those broadleaf weeds that I had already listed. And often we can find multiple combinations of these active ingredients, products that have 3-way or 4-way combinations of these broadleaf herbicides. Okay, so remember, if you're going to kill everything, use a non-selective herbicide like glyphosate. If you're just intending to kill the broadleaf weeds and thicken up the turf grass you have, use a selective broadleaf herbicide like 2,4-D, triclopyr, MCPP, or dicamba. Okay, and remember, weed control here is an optional step, not a required step. Okay, so next we have surface renovation. And remember, up to this point, we've taken a soil test, we've sent it into the lab, we've gone out and done our weed control, and now we're to surface renovation. So this is a required step. So some people will do steps 1 and 2 before this, or some people may be starting their renovation process with step 3, surface renovation. Okay, so some possible surface renovation methods include dethatching, which you see in the top left photo here. So in this instance, we did step 1 and 2, meaning we took a soil sample. We then applied a broadleaf herbicide, or non-selective herbicide on here to kill the grass and the existing weeds. Now we're dethatching the turf to seed back into it. Other surface renovation techniques include core aeration, which you see in the bottom left picture. So punching holes down into the existing turf, which will allow seed to get down into those holes and improve seed establishment. You've also got phrase mowing, which is pictured in the top right photo here. So that's a way of quickly stripping off the top 1 or 2 inches of the soil and then providing a nice seed bed to add seed on top of a field like that, or sod on top of it. And then finally, your more labor-intensive renovation processes include these bottom right 2 photos. So sod cutting off the surface, removing the sod, and then rototilling the surface. If you're going to rototill the surface, I really do recommend sod cutting off the existing top 1 inch or 1/2 inch of soil with turf, getting the turf grass out of there, and then rototilling the soil only to 1 inch or 2 in depth. You don't have to go really deep in your rototilling. The deeper you go, the more work you're going to make for yourself when it comes to smoothing out the surface and getting it nice and flat for your lawn establishment. So again, if you're going to go the route of rototilling, sod cut off the existing turf and then rototill to a very shallow depth, like 1/2 inch or 1 inch if possible. So that's our surface renovation step 3. Okay, so during surface renovation, that's a great time to remove any debris that's present. So if you've got tree stumps or roots or rocks and stones in your lawn or athletic field area or whatever turf grass area you're renovating, it's time to get that stuff out of there. So go through and remove objects like tree stumps, roots, and stones. And if you want to establish a slope, this is a great time to put a slope on the surface to help improve your surface drainage if needed. So if surface drainage is an issue during surface renovation, that's when we want to put a slope on our area. Okay, so that brings us to step 4 now, liming and basic fertilizer application. Okay, and again, this is not a required but a suggested step. Okay, so ideally, the person has gone out and done step 1 and taken a soil sample. That soil sample went off to a lab, the results came back, and it's going to show you now what you have to do to amend the soil pH and amend the primary nutrient deficiencies in the soil. So during this step, if the soil test told us that we had acidic soil, meaning the pH was below 5.5, we now want to go out and apply a liming source. So this could be limestone, calcium carbonate, or dolomite, which has calcium and magnesium in it. Okay. A nice option that dolomite provides is if we had a soil test that was low in soil pH and had a magnesium deficiency, the dolomite would help us increase the soil pH. It would provide some calcium and it would help amend the magnesium deficiency that was identified in the soil. Okay, so primary nutrient deficiencies are also going to be identified with this basic soil test. And I think the two most concerning are the macronutrients phosphorus and potassium. And some examples of fertilizer sources that can be used to amend deficiencies in phosphorus and potassium include superphosphate, which you see in the bag on the left, and potash, which you see in the bag on the right. Okay, so superphosphate is a phosphorus source and potash is a potassium source. Okay, our basic soil test is going to tell us if we have deficiencies in the secondary macronutrients as well. And these secondary macronutrients are calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Okay, and examples of nutrient sources of these elements include limestone for calcium, dolomite for magnesium, and elemental sulfur to amend sulfur deficiencies. Okay, so those are your three examples of secondary nutrients and how to amend deficiencies documented on the soil test. Okay, I would recommend to homeowners and people renovating turfgrass areas, do not apply lime or primary or secondary nutrients at this time if you have not taken a soil test. You could be wasting a lot of money. A soil test only costs $15 or $20, and it's going to provide you very valuable information in terms of what amount of lime, what amount of dolomite, what amount of magnesium or sulfur is needed to amend your macronutrient, primary and secondary nutrient deficiencies and liming issues. Okay, so take a soil test before you go out and apply liming and basic fertilizers. Okay, so step 5 now, seed bed preparation. And again, in my opinion, this is an optional step in here. Okay, so ideally the person has gone out and taken a soil test, they did their weed control, they came through and did the surface renovations, took the existing plants and turf and rocks and roots and tree stumps out. They then looked at the results of the soil test, applied the lime and basic fertilizer that was needed. Now we need to do some final seed bed preparation. Okay, and the difference now with seed bed preparation compared to surface renovation is you're just doing a really superficial renovation of the soil surface, just fluffing up the soil, trying to relieve any surface compaction or crusting that's developed over time. So on the left, you see a bunch of us here hand raking the surface, and we're just affecting the top quarter of the inch or half inch of soil in doing this seed bed preparation with these hand rakes. On the right over here, you see a video. And in this video, you're looking at a Harley rake or power rake. And again, it's just fluffing up that top half inch of soil, prepping the area for seeding, making a nice soft soil surface for seed to go into. Okay, so that was our seed bed preparation step. Okay, so next, step 6, we're back to a required step again, and this is our starter fertilizer application. So this is a required step. Okay, so a thing to note here, your starter fertilizer, we're going to apply this with or without that liming and basic fertilizer application. Okay, and the reason we're doing this now is to provide nitrogen as well as some supplemental phosphorus and potassium right at the soil surface where the seed is. Okay, so remember when we did our basic fertilizer application, we then came in and lightly raked the surface of the soil to about a half of an inch or a quarter of an inch, which can turn down some of that nutrients that we applied. So we're going to come back now and make a second fertilizer application. In my opinion, Fertilizing at establishment is the most important time. So making sure we get a nice take on the turf grass will really ensure that we have a healthy lawn that's able to outcompete weeds in the future. Okay, so we want to get this off right. And that's why I suggest we do a starter fertilizer application on top of the basic fertilizer application we made. Okay, and again, if the person has not taken a soil test, they should always do, whether they have or have not taken a soil test, they should always do a starter fertilizer application. This is with or without that basic starter fertilizer application step. Okay, so we're going to apply products with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it this time. And we're looking for products that have, if you look at a bag of fertilizer, on the front you'll see 3 numbers. The number on the left is nitrogen, the number in the middle is phosphorus, and the number on the right is potassium. So in the left fertilizer bag, you see 18% nitrogen, 24% phosphorus, and 12% potassium. So this would be a great example of a starter fertilizer that has relatively equal parts of nitrogen and potassium in it and high levels of phosphorus in it. Another very acceptable establishment or starter fertilizer product would be something with equal parts nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, like this fertilizer on the right side, 12, 12, 12. Okay, so again, this is the only time in turf grass management where we want to apply fertilizers high in phosphorus and potassium. After this, if we're choosing to apply synthetic fertilizers, I suggest products high in nitrogen and then low in phosphorus and potassium. Okay, so this is our starter fertilizer application, having something with high amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it. Okay, so now we're on to step 7, and again, this is a required step here. So we did our seed bed preparation. We did our required step of a starter fertilizer application using a product containing high amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it. Now we're going to do our seeding or sodding, and of course this is a required step in our turfgrass establishment. Okay, so when it comes to seeding, we want to put down 10 to 15 seeds per square feet. This is important because when we buy and apply seed, you're going to see very different seeding rates, and this is related to the size of the seed. So when we apply Kentucky bluegrass, say in the eastern half, the high desert or far east part of Oregon, we're going to be applying Kentucky bluegrass at 1.5 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And if you notice in this picture across the bottom of the slide, the Kentucky bluegrass has a relatively small seed size compared to something like perennial ryegrass. So 1.5 pounds per 1,000 feet of Kentucky bluegrass translates to around 10 to 15 seeds per square feet. Perennial ryegrass, on the other hand, which we're going to be using in the valley or the western half of Oregon, should be applied at 11 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And because the seed is much larger than that of the Kentucky bluegrass, the perennial ryegrass, when applied at 11 pounds per 1,000 square feet, will again now provide 10 to 15 seeds per square inch. Okay, so pay close attention to your seeding rate here. The amount of seed you apply is related to the size of the seed, and not all seed is going to be applied at the same number of pounds per 1,000 square feet. It varies quite dramatically depending on the turf grass type that you buy and apply. All right, so after we have seeded our turf grass, we always go back and we rake in the turf grass and the seed. And when we rake it, we actually flip our spring rakes upside down and we press the grass seed into the top of the soil surface to ensure good seed to soil contact. So here you see some students doing that out at the research farm. They've got these spring rakes upside down and they're pressing the turfgrass seeds into the soil surface to ensure good establishment. Okay, and here you just see an example showing the difference. On the left, you've got seed that's been raked, and you can see that it's got really nice seed to soil contact versus seed on the right there, which has not been raked, and you'll notice that the seed is kind of sitting on top of the soil surface, which has then reduced the seed to soil contact, and that's going to slow down the establishment because nutrients and water can't get to the seed as quickly to help with the establishment process. Okay, so we could also apply sod at this time, and sod is a relatively good option, particularly when we want a nice looking lawn established really quickly. So if we want the lawn to look super nice in just a day or two, sod is our option versus seeding. Seeding is going to take several days to germinate and establish slowly over time. Okay, so that then brings us to the final step here of mulching. And again, mulching is an optional step. It's not required. It's going to be something that we do when we're seeding. We're not going to mulch over top of sod that we've applied on the soil surface. Okay, so when we are mulching over turf grass, we're just putting down a really thin layer of mulch. At the most, we want to put down a 1/4 inch layer of mulch material. Okay, and what the mulch is going to do is help reduce evapotranspiration, reduce temperature fluctuations, and prevent erosion. So it's going to provide a really nice micro environment for the newly seeded turf. It's going to stop it from washing away, and it's going to increase the number of days, or decrease the number of days, increase the rate of germination, making it germinate and establish faster by reducing transpiration and reducing temperature fluctuations. And there's all kinds of different examples of good mulching material. You can use straw or hay, which you see in the left picture, ground up paper or newspaper, which you see in the second photo. You can use compost as long as it's dry, composted material and not wet compost or wet manure. You can apply composted plant material or composted manure. And you can also use seeding blankets, which you see in the far right. And all of these do a very well or very good job at improving turfgrass germination rates and speed. Okay, so that was our 8 steps to successful turfgrass establishment. And let's just review these steps real quickly here. Your first step was a soil test, and again, this is not a required step. Ideally, we're taking a composite soil sample, about 10 per acre, and this is going to give us really valuable information on the pH, lime requirement, and basic fertilizer deficiencies and basic fertilizer requirements. Okay, we can come and do our weed control next, step 2. And if we're doing a complete renovation, trying to kill everything, we should put down a non-selective herbicide like glyphosate. If we want to do a renovation and leave the existing grass and just kill the broadleaf weeds, we can use a selective broadleaf herbicide like 2,4-D, triclopyr, or dicamba, or combinations of those in mixtures. Our third step is one of our required steps, and this is a surface renovation. So this included dethatching, aerification, phrase mowing, sod cutting, and rototilling the soil under the sod to a relatively shallow depth. That was our surface renovation. That's also the time when we want to go through and remove any rocks or tree stumps or things that are in our way and establish a slope if needed. Okay. Number 4 was again a optional step, and this is liming and basic fertilizer applications based on what was identified in the soil test. Okay. So our liming options include calcium carbonate or limestone, dolomite if we have a magnesium deficiency, and basic fertilizers we discussed include included triple superphosphate, potash for potassium deficiencies. We had limestone, which could provide calcium, and dolomite, which could provide magnesium. Both of those are also liming sources as well. And we had elemental sulfur to amend sulfur deficiencies. Okay. Step 4, another optional step, was seed bed preparation. And this was raking down just to a really shallow depth, like 1/4 of an inch, just to fluff up the soil before putting down seed or sod. We had step 6, again a required step, being starter fertilizer application. And we want nutrients that are high in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in this example. So that could be a product like 18% nitrogen, 24% phosphorus, 15% potassium, or your 12-12-12, which has equal parts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. 12% nitrogen, 12% phosphorus, 12% potassium. Okay. After this, whenever you do fertilizer applications on lawn, I suggest if you're going to use a synthetic product, it be high in nitrogen and low in phosphorus and potassium. Okay. Step 7, was seeding or sodding. In this step, remember to look at the seed that you purchased and make sure you're applying the proper amount of seed per 1,000 square feet based on the individual seed that you bought. So we had 2 examples. We talked about Kentucky bluegrass needing to be applied at 1.5 pounds per 1,000 square feet, while something like perennial ryegrass needs to be applied at rates as high as 10 and 11 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Okay, and then finally, our last optional step was mulching, putting down a really thin layer of material over top of the seed, less than 1/4 of an inch. And that could be straw, it could be newspaper, it could be a seeding blanket, and that will help improve establishment, decrease the number of days required for germination and take of the turf grass. Okay. And then again, a final review point here on our optimum time for turfgrass establishment. You can do fall and spring seedings. In my opinion, the fall is better because you'll likely require less irrigation and you'll get 2 growing seasons, the fall and the following spring, before entering into the summer months, the stressful time of the year for cool season grasses. Okay, the second best time I think is spring. And for this one, that's being April and May. You can do your spring establishment, but you're more likely to be dependent on irrigation, particularly during that first summer when establishing cool season grasses and getting that newly established turf through the first summer of drought stress. A little more irrigation will be required than normal, I think, in that circumstance. Okay, and then finally here, regardless of your establishment time, if you have a period just a couple days without rainfall, you need to apply supplemental irrigation. If there's no rain, you need to do daily irrigation to keep the surface of the soil wet until the grass is established to about the 3-leaf stage. We then can start to back down on the irrigation frequency once we've got some grass growing and established. Okay. So that was turfgrass establishment. We talked about the time of year for best establishment. We talked about the 8 steps to successful turfgrass establishment. If you have any more questions, you can contact me, Alec Kowaleski, the turfgrass specialist at Oregon State University. Just use my email address, alec.kowaleski@oregonstate.edu. Thanks, and I hope to talk to you all again soon. Later.